A new round of the USE League kicked off in February 2023, the first round using a new set of rules, what I've taken to calling 2.5. In this round, as in all rounds, I have two opponents. Kambaaa I've played before, but not, I think, in the league, and Ramsey Bolton, who joined in the last round of the league. This will be a tough round. A reminder on standings, my opponents are currently sitting 4th and 5th overall in the league, the field this time being a near repeat of the previous round, but with Darth Swader absent and Mark Day in, having skipped round 3. Let's talk about those rules changes. The big one is diplomacy. To place markers, you now need a friendly active country bordering it. The UK can do this across sea zones, and the design team have, as subsequent to these games, suggested doing the same for Germany. But critically, Italy and Turkey now require 3 successors to activate. The result is that the Germans now have some justification for activating Hungary, and we'll see a bit of that happening, though honestly I still think activating Yugoslavia makes more sense in most openings. It is now, practically speaking, almost impossible to activate Spain and Sweden, and the latter impacts the invasion of Norway. Medlocks are going to go from a standard strategy to being very rare. Allied Italy is now very unlikely, but that is replaced to some extent with the risk of Italy simply staying neutral during the war. So let's get to the game and see how some of this pans out. At the point of recording, I'm quite a bit further forward than this because of the long hiatus early on, and the general result is that the diplomacy does seem to work a lot better than it did under version 2. And we're going to look at Kambaa's game today, which is a historical opening. Worth noting that this was a noticeable trend in the first 2 rounds after the rules change. There had been a deliberate attempt by the design team to nerf the long opening, and league players seemed to respond by falling back on the most widely played opening, the historical. As we'll see in a moment, I made a deliberate decision to play East first in this round, but was almost alone in that. Here, Kambaaa plays it historically with an attack on Poland. And then Kambaaa activates Hungary. Due to the new adjacency rules, the success from conquering Poland can only be played on Hungary, which makes then using an immediate success to activate it very tempting. Kambaaa also invaded Denmark, but did not take it. The risk with not immediately taking Denmark and saving the conquest so you can have the pro-axis marker later, is that you get caught up in some awkward engagement with the British in the Copenhagen Gambit. Once you get to Copenhagen, as they have here, you cannot actually take it without conquering Denmark, and the point was to defer that conquest. And the Danes will eventually rebuild their units at Aalborg. You'll have to keep spending production points to batter down the fleet and transport at Copenhagen. You can't land in Norway, and the French can freely poke at German fighters in range, which can't fight back without triggering West invaded. The 3 political successors are out by October. I draw the 3rd and use it to remove the Italian pro-axis marker. I'll be happy simply to keep Italy out of the war. This was my main worry going into the revised rules, that there will be a lot of games where Italy simply doesn't activate for either faction. At the moment, I'm playing defence on the diplomacy box, so I'm trying to keep it full, and I'm not drawing unless I've got a good chance of getting something. Kambaaa goes for Romania. They have fair weather in November, so I don't think this will be much of a fight. My foothold in Copenhagen is dislodged, but it forces the Axis to take Denmark without using the political success to remove a pro-Allied counter, and that's a gain for me. The Axis draw a political failure, but it's of limited value. Romania is about to fall, so once I put it on the pro-Western marker on Italy, it'll just be taken back off again. Okay, this is a little gamey, but it's worth explaining. The UK fighter can fly to France as long as it remains within 3 hexes of the UK. It can also attack any German Luftwaffe unit within 7 hexes. It cannot overfly Belgium because that's neutral. Critically, the Luftwaffe cannot conduct their own airstrikes. If they do, they'll activate West invaded. So with the UK and French air units ganging up, they can exhaust the Luftwaffe on the frontier. The only way for the German forces to deal with that is to redeploy to Denmark out of range, which is useful to the Allies as it forces them to spend a sortie moving back to the front when the invasion comes. At this point, I switch over to an aggressive diplomacy strategy, with both the Soviets and the Western drawing from the Diplomacy Cup. We're still quite a few months from an invasion of France, so there won't be new counters going in, and hopefully we will draw out some of the pro-Axis markers, as we'll see, critically, have the cup empty when the invasion of France happens. The situation is interesting in April. An Axis invasion of Bulgaria has not gone well. There are 2 panzers and an air unit tied down and out of position for the invasion of France. I've made my preparations for the invasions of France. To be clear, France is essentially unholdable. The French don't have enough units, there isn't enough ground, and so on. The best you can do is make it hard for the Axis and set up as best you can for the possibility of some blinding luck. Practical experience has convinced me this is about as good a defence as the French can muster in a conventional scenario. It creates 2 lines of zones of control, the first near Belgium, the second along the Somme and Marne. The units creating those zones of controls are in positions where they're in towns or over rivers. The -1 modifier is nice, but the real gain from that positioning is that each attack costs 3 movement points rather than 2, so it only takes a couple of reversals for this to go badly. And it's supplemented by the positioning of the British Expeditionary Force. That position at Lille forces the Luftwaffe into conflict with the RAF because the only way to get supply beyond the Seine is to capture Lille, Calais and Paris. We do come very close to a complete Axis disaster. A political failure followed by a Western success gets 2 pro-Western markers on Italy. May is fair weather and the Germans begin their attack on France. My general preference is to position the minor units on the line northeast of Brussels, but not to bring any French units forward into that space. A little tactical note, east is not a good angle to attack the Dutch unit from. It allows the unit to retreat to Amsterdam, which means needing at least 1 more attack to take the Netherlands. If instead you attack from the northeast, then a retreat cannot be to Amsterdam and the Netherlands can be taken with a simple move. The aggressive strategy on the Diplomacy Cup has got us to this position. With Holland and Belgium going, France being invaded, there's a whole bunch of pro-Axis markers and nothing else in the cup. The Axis will have to save 5 production points during the invasion in order to purchase one of these, and we can respond by immediately drawing from the same cup and eliminating a pro-Axis marker. By July, the Axis have taken Paris, but they've not dislodged the British around Calais, and now we see an issue for them. If the German forces try to strike south of the Seine, they will be walking into supply traps. They need that route through Calais that the UK is defending before they can make this move. Kambaaa gets very lucky and is able to capture Calais, but a half-strength UK unit survives on the route between Calais and Paris. The result is that 4 German units fall into supply traps. That's going to substantially reduce the German capacity for attacks next turn. I managed to retake Calais with the British, but in August the German forces begin by taking out the weak unit northwest of Paris, isolating Calais, which they then pummel until they take it. This establishes a supply route. The Germans are then able to push to the Seine, but they're held there. I want to draw attention to the tenuous position of the French and the overextended German units at Dijon. The Dijon unit can be easily isolated if I'm willing to give up part of the Maginot Line. That's no longer the issue it was on previous turns, because the Axis now have a supply route, which they didn't have before, so giving up the supply route through the Maginot Line just isn't a serious problem. I'm able to isolate and destroy the German unit. With 9 even odds attacks, there's no great surprise there, and I even have enough movement to move the motorised unit into the empty fort. We get a surprising result in September. The Axis do break through in Normandy and are able to get all the way to the coast on the Bay of Biscay. However, the French, amazingly, still have 1 national will, which means they have technically made it to the bad weather. It won't matter. It's inconceivable the German forces cannot take at least 1 national will next turn, and they do in fact do that by inflicting a DE on a French unit. Kambaaa spends the unlimited success from France on Italy. This only leaves a single pro-Axis marker in the Diplomacy Cup to activate Italy, which I have now refilled with no events and a political failure. So there's a substantial risk that if the political failure is drawn, Italy will probably stay neutral. That would be very bad news for the Axis. And I think this is a point worth making. In the end, none of this fighting really mattered. France collapsed, it did not last long enough to interfere with other German offensives, Italy ultimately did enter, and so on. And that is going to happen most of the time with the Battle of France. But the point is statistical. Games in which France does hold, or Italy does not enter, will be wins for the Allied player. Understanding the defence of France sufficiently to make the job hard for the Axis is important, because it statistically edges some of your defences into victories. All it would have taken in this game is for May to have been poor weather, and I probably would have held. Anyway, for today, here endeth the lesson.